Hello, young soul. Welcome to the Daily Horror Channel. If you are afraid of real and scary reports, this channel is not for you. I suggest you leave this video, but if you are not afraid of listening to these horrifying reports, I suggest you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. In a world where dreams of greatness often lead us down dark paths, there are those who will do anything to achieve success. This is the story of a man whose burning desire to become a famous writer led him to make a pact with forces he barely understood. In following this path, he discovered that the price of success can be excruciatingly high. My name is Eduardo. Since I was a child, I have always been fascinated by books. I grew up in a house full of them. My father was a librarian and my mother was a literature teacher. They encouraged me to read and write, and I dreamed of being a great writer, someone whose stories would be remembered forever. However, adult life proved to be more complicated than I imagined. After finishing high school, I decided to dedicate myself to writing. I worked in a small bookstore during the day and wrote at night. My parents insisted that I go to journalism school, but I believed that my talent would be enough to launch me into stardom. I published my first novel for 25 years, but sales were disappointing, and the reviews were harsh. Failure shook my confidence, but it didn't destroy my desire to succeed. Over the years, I continued writing and publishing short stories in literary magazines, but I never got the recognition I so desired. The frustration grew, and I began to question my abilities. It was then that I heard about a man, a wizard who lived on the outskirts of the city, known for granting success in exchange for a high-priced desperate. I decided to look for the wizard. His name was Alcides. He lived in an old, decaying house, surrounded by an atmosphere of mystery and decay. When I knocked on the door, he greeted me with an enigmatic smile. "What brings you here, Eduardo?" he asked, as if he already knew my answer. "Need help. I want to be a famous writer, but everything I do seems to fail. Can you help me?" Alcides looked at me for a moment, assessing me. Then he waved me in. The house was full of old and strange objects. He led me to a room where there was an altar covered in candles and esoteric symbols. "I can grant you the success you desire, but the price is your soul," he said bluntly. I hesitated. The idea of selling my soul was terrifying, but my ambition took over. I agreed to the pact, and Alcides handed me an old book with a leather cover and yellowed pages. "This is the forbidden book. He will give you unlimited inspiration, but be careful what he writes. His words have power." I returned home with the book, eager to start writing. That night, I sat at the table and opened the book. Immediately, I was overcome by a wave of inspiration. The words flowed out of me like never before, and I wrote for hours on end. When I finished, I felt an indescribable euphoria. I knew I had created something extraordinary. My new book was published, and to my surprise, it became an instant bestseller. Success came quickly and overwhelmingly. My life changed overnight. I started attending literary events, giving interviews, and enjoying the luxury I always wanted. I met Alice, a young librarian, and we fell in love. Everything seemed perfect, but I soon realized something was wrong. Over time, I began to notice strange events around me. Objects in my house moved on their own, shadows crept across the walls, and I heard eerie whispers at night. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched was constant. Alice also noticed the changes. She asked me about the unexplained noises and movements, but I had no answers. One night, as I was writing, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around and saw a shadow with glowing red eyes. I was paralyzed with fear. The shadow approached and whispered in my ear, "You can't run away, Eduardo. You will pay the price." Terror gripped me. Desperate, I looked for Alcides, but he had disappeared without a trace. I decided to investigate the forbidden book, trying to understand its origin and power. I discovered that it had belonged to an ancient writer who had also made a pact with the devil. and that all of his successors had suffered terrible fates. As he investigated, supernatural events intensified. The atmosphere around my house became darker and more oppressive. The nights were filled with a piercing cold and a terrifying silence, broken only by the whispers of the shadows. I started hearing Alice's voice in my dreams, begging me to stop. Alice worried more and more about me. She tried to comfort me, but I knew the situation was beyond what she could understand. One night, while we were talking in the kitchen, the dishes started moving by themselves and fell to the floor, breaking into 1,000 pieces. Alice screamed and I tried to calm her down, but I knew something much worse was coming. "Eduardo, what's going on?" she asked, her eyes full of fear. "I don't know, Alice. I think I did something terrible. I need to figure out how to stop this." Determined to end the torment, I continued to investigate the book. I discovered that the only way to break the pact was to destroy the book and everything I had written with its influence. However, doing so would mean losing all my success and returning to anonymity. As I pondered my decision, the supernatural events reached a terrifying climax. The shadows began to take shape, taking on grotesque appearances that seemed like something out of my worst nightmares. My home had become a battleground between good and evil, and Alice was caught in the middle of it. One night I woke up to a scream. I ran into the bedroom and found Alice on the floor, writhing in pain. One of the demons had possessed her, using her body as an instrument of torment. I felt an indescribable despair and knew I needed to act immediately. I ran to my office, grabbed the forbidden book and threw it into the fireplace. The flames grew, illuminating the room with an intense light. As the book burned, I felt an evil presence dissipate, as if it was being exorcised. However, Alice's screams continued. I needed to destroy more. I took all my manuscripts, all the pages written under the influence of the book, and threw them into the fire. The surrounding shadows began to disappear, and the air became lighter. Finally, there was silence, and I ran back to Alice. She was conscious but weak. She looked at me with eyes full of pain and understanding. "Eduardo, what did you do?" she whispered. "I broke the pact, Alice." He finished. But he knew the torment wasn't completely over. Although the demons had been exorcised, the scars of the pact would remain. I decided we needed to start over somewhere else, away from all the dark memories. We moved to a small town in the countryside where no one knew us. I started working as a library assistant, away from the spotlight and fame. Alice and I rebuilt our lives, but the memory of the horrors we faced never completely left us. As I tried to forget, I knew that the evil I had summoned still lurked in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to return. And so, my journey of redemption continued, always aware that the darkness was just dormant, ready to awaken again. And in the back of my mind, the question persisted: how long could we escape? We moved to a small town in the interior called Miraflores, a peaceful and isolated place where we hoped to rebuild our lives and find some peace. But from the first night, I realized that the horrors we faced would not be so easily forgotten. Something dark seemed to follow us, an evil presence that hid in the shadows and watched us with invisible eyes. The house we rented was old, with heavy wooden furniture and windows that creaked at the slightest breath of wind. Alice tried to adapt, but I saw the fear in her eyes. She never directly mentioned what had happened, but she knew it was always on her mind. The first night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard a whisper. I stood up, thinking it was just my imagination, but the whisper continued, echoing through the halls of the house. I walked towards the sound, which seemed to be coming from the basement. I walked down the stairs slowly. With each step, the air became colder and heavier. When I opened the cellar door, the darkness seemed to swallow me. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it, revealing dusty boxes and old furniture. In the corner of the basement, I saw something that made me freeze. A hunched figure with glowing eyes watching me. "Did you think you could escape?" The voice was a sinister whisper, full of malice. I stepped back, trying to remain calm, but I knew I was facing something far beyond my understanding. I quickly climbed the stairs, locking the door behind me. That night I couldn't sleep a wink. Fear and tension kept me alert. The next day, I decided to tell Alice what I had seen. We needed to face this together. When I finished speaking, I saw the terror in her eyes. "Eduardo, we need to get out of here. This place is cursed." "I know, Alice, but where can we go? We can't keep running." We decided to investigate the history of the house and the city. We went to the local library where we found old records about the house. We discovered that, many years ago, an entire family had mysteriously disappeared from that same house. Local legends spoke of vengeful spirits and dark rituals. As we leafed through the records, an elderly woman approached us. She introduced herself as Donna Marlene, the town librarian. "You are messing with things that should be left in the past," she said with a worried look. We told her about the strange events and the pact I had made. She listened carefully, then took us to a private room. "This city has ancient secrets, secrets that should never be revealed. The house where you are living is a portal to evil. Many have already tried to face it and failed. Do you need help?" She gave us an ancient grimoire, a book of rituals that she said could help us fight evil. But she warned us that using the book was extremely dangerous and could have unpredictable consequences. We decided we had no choice. We needed to fight. That night we prepared the ritual in the basement. We light candles around a protective circle and begin to chant the words from the grimoire. The air became thick and the temperature dropped drastically. Suddenly the shadows on the walls began to move, forming grotesque figures that approached us. The evil presence intensified, and I felt a crushing pressure on my chest. "Eduardo, don't stop!" Alice shouted, trying to keep me focused. I continued to chant the words, even when the figures got so close that I could feel their cold breath on my face. The candles flickered, almost going out, but then a bright light filled the basement. The shadows retreated, and a piercing scream echoed through the air, followed by dead silence. We thought we had won, but I knew it wasn't the end. The evil presence had been driven away but not destroyed. We needed to be vigilant, as we knew that evil would find a way back. Over the next few days, things seemed to return to normal. Alice and I began to rebuild our lives with more hope. But one night, while I was alone in the library, I felt a familiar presence. I looked around and saw the shadow with glowing red eyes in the reflection of the window. "You can't escape, Eduardo. I'll be back." The shadow disappeared, but the warning remained. He needed to be prepared for when evil returned, and I knew I would return. The pact he had made had consequences that he still did not fully understand. As I write this, I know the end is not yet here. The fight against dark forces continues, and my journey is far from over. Evil lurks, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Alice and I are stronger, but we know the battle we face is never ending. And so, my story continues, a constant fight against the darkness I myself have invoked. We live one day at a time, always aware that evil is out there, waiting, watching, and in the darkness, the whispers never cease. The days passed in tense silence. Every movement seemed to carry an implicit threat. I tried to focus on my work at the library, but recent events were always on my mind. Alice and I did our best to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but we knew it was only a matter of time before the evil presence returned. One night, while I was working in the library, I felt a cold draft. I looked around, but there were no windows open. The silence became oppressive, as if the library itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, lights began to flicker, and shadows began to move across the walls. I tried to remain calm, but terror was growing inside me. The shadows formed grotesque figures, getting closer and closer. I heard whispers, a cacophony of indistinct voices that seemed to come from all directions. "Eduardo, you can't escape." Victor's voice echoed in the darkness, full of malice. I ran to the door, but it was locked. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I quickly turned around, but there was no one there. The shadows continued to draw closer, and the air became increasingly cold, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, an invisible force threw me against the wall. He falls to the ground, stunned. The voices intensified, and I could feel the evil presence growing stronger. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on anything that could give me strength. It was then that I remembered the grimoire. It was in the library office, stored in a drawer. With difficulty, I got up and ran to the office, the shadows chasing me. I opened the drawer and picked up the book, my hands shaking. I began chanting an exorcism ritual, my voice shaky but determined. The shadows hesitated as if they were being repelled. I continued to chant, with each word feeling the evil presence weaken. However, the invisible force that threw me against the wall returned, this time with more violence, lifting me into the air and throwing me against the bookshelf. The volumes fell around me, creating a cacophony of paper and broken wood. In the midst of the pain and confusion, I heard a cold, icy laugh. Victor emerged from the shadows, his figure distorted by the darkness. "Did you really think you could get rid of me?" His voice was an evil whisper. He reached out his hand, and I felt a searing pain shoot through my body. Every fiber of my being felt like it was on fire, and I screamed in agony. Alice, who had come to pick me up, entered the library and saw the scene. Her eyes widened in terror. "Edward!" She ran towards me, but was repelled by an invisible force. With all my strength, I continued to chant the exorcism, but the words were barely audible among my screams of pain. Alice, desperate, took the grimoire and began to read the words with me, her voice joining mine. The shadows began to retreat, but Victor remained, his presence an anchor of evil. With a final effort, Alice and I shouted the final words of the ritual. An intense light filled the library, momentarily blinding us. When the light disappeared, Victor was gone, but the price we paid was high. The library was in ruins, and Alice was unconscious next to me. I felt a mixture of relief and despair. I knew we had managed to ward off the evil for now, but I also knew it could return at any moment. I lifted Alice and carried her out of the library. The cold night air enveloped us like an icy hug. She woke up slowly, her eyes full of questions and fear. "Eduardo, is this over?" "For now, yes, but we need to be prepared. He will return." We decided that we could not continue in Miraflores. It was too dangerous. We quickly packed our things and left in the middle of the night, leaving the house and the library behind. As we drove away, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. The evil I summoned was still out there, waiting for an opportunity to return. Our new life would be a constant struggle against darkness. I knew we couldn't run away forever, but we were ready to face whatever came. And so, our journey continued. An endless battle against the shadows that I myself had brought into the world. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made me freeze. For a moment, I thought I saw Victor's red eyes glowing in the darkness. I took a deep breath, knowing the fight was far from over. And as we drove into the unknown, a new determination dawned in my heart. The real battle was just beginning. In the darkness of our desires, where greed and ambition intertwine, the human soul is tested in unimaginable ways. This is the story of Gabriel, a man whose thirst for success led him to a dark pact, triggering events that would challenge his sanity and the very essence of his existence. My name is Gabriel, and I always wanted to be more than I am. Since I was little, I watched my parents struggle to pay the bills, and I promised myself that I would never live like that. I grew up in a simple house where every penny was counted. My father, an honest and hard-working man, always told me that success came with effort. My mother, on the other hand, was more practical and insisted that I should take shortcuts when possible. At school, I was never the best student. I preferred to daydream imagining a future where I would have everything I wanted without having to work so hard. That's how, at the age of 18, I entered the job market. I started as an intern at an advertising agency. Despite my initial enthusiasm, I soon realized that the road to the top was much more difficult than I had imagined. The years passed, and I continued to see less talented colleagues get promotions while I fell behind. My frustrations grew every day. I remembered my mother's words and started looking for alternatives. It was then that I heard about a man known as the artist. They said he could grant any wish, but the price was high. One night, after another exhausting day at work, I decided to look for this artist. Curiosity and desperation spoke louder. I followed the instructions I received from a colleague who knew someone who had already made a pact with him. I found myself in front of an old, decaying art gallery tucked away in a dimly lit alley. I entered the gallery with a mix of fear and excitement. The walls were covered in portraits that seemed to watch me as I walked. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty hall. At the bottom, I saw a tall, thin man with gray hair and piercing eyes. He smiled as I approached. "Good evening, Gabriel. I was waiting for you," he said in a soft, mesmerizing voice. "Are you the artist?" I asked, trying to hide my nervousness. "Yes, I am. I see that you are looking for something beyond the ordinary. Are you willing to pay the price?" Without hesitation, I said yes. The artist took me to a back room where there was an easel with a blank canvas. He explained that he would paint a portrait of me that would grow old and suffer in my place, in exchange for my immediate success. I agreed immediately, without thinking about the consequences. As he painted, I felt a strange sensation of cold and oppression. It was like something was being ripped away from me. When he was finished, the portrait felt so alive that I could almost swear my eyes in the painting were following me. The artist then handed me a key and said that the painting should be kept in a safe place, away from anyone who could see it. From that moment on, my life changed radically. Within a few months, I was promoted to creative director at the agency. Money, cars, trips, everything I ever dreamed of was within my reach. But as time went by, I started to notice strange things. Objects in my house moved on their own. Shadows seemed to dance on the walls, and unexplained noises tormented me at night. One night, while working late at the office, I heard a whisper that seemed to come from all around me. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone. The cold in the room was almost unbearable, and the feeling of being watched made me paranoid. I decided to go home, but the path seemed endless, as if the night itself was trying to swallow me. When I got home, I went straight to the room where I kept the portrait. There, things became even more terrifying. The picture, once perfect, was now distorted. My face in the painting seemed to rot, and the once bright eyes were dull and empty. Panic took over me. I called the artist, begging for help. He just laughed and said the price of my success was my own soul. Desperately, I tried to destroy the portrait, but it seemed indestructible. Every blow I made reverberated in my own flesh, as if we were connected in some way. The following days were torment. The feeling of cold and oppression increased, and disturbing events became more frequent. One night, I woke up to a shadowy figure at the foot of my bed. It was my own reflection, but deformed and grotesque. The figure whispered that time was running out and that I should prepare for the end. My sanity was slipping away. I tried to seek help, but who would believe a story like that? My friends and colleagues began to withdraw, thinking I was going crazy. I felt isolated and desperate, trapped in a never-ending cycle of terror. Finally, I decided to confront the artist one last time. I returned to the gallery, which now seemed more dark and threatening than ever. The artist was waiting for me with that same enigmatic smile. "Have you come to seek redemption, Gabriel?" he asked with a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "I want to undo the pact," I screamed, feeling tears rolling down my face. "You knew the price from the beginning. There is no going back." Desperation consumed me. I decided that, If I couldn't break the pact, I would at least take the artist with me. I advanced on him, but an invisible force threw me against the wall. I felt my life slipping through my fingers, and the last thing I saw was the artist's triumphant smile. I woke up in my apartment, exhausted and disoriented. The portrait was still there, more distorted and hideous than ever. I knew my battle was far from over. I needed to find a way to free myself from this curse before it completely consumed my soul. As I looked at the portrait, an idea came to me. Perhaps if he found the source of the artist's power, he could destroy him. I decided to investigate his story, look for clues that could lead me to a solution. My journey was just beginning, and the road ahead was long and dangerous. With the weight of fear and oppression accompanying me, I went in search of answers. He knew he would face many dangers, but he was determined to fight. The future was uncertain and terror still surrounded me, but the hope of liberation drove me to continue. So my story unfolded, a constant battle against the darkness that had settled in my life. Every step I took was an advance towards truth, towards redemption. The journey was just beginning, and I was ready to face any challenge that came along the way. When I left the apartment that morning, the feeling that something terrible was lurking never left me. The city, which once seemed vibrant and full of life, now seemed like a desolate landscape, shrouded in shadows and inaudible whispers. I decided to start my investigation in the heart of the city, where rumors about the artist were most frequent. I drove to the city's oldest neighborhood, a place full of historic buildings and narrow streets. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the air itself was thick with ancient secrets and forgotten curses. I found an old bookstore, a place that seemed like something out of a Gothic nightmare, with shelves crammed with dusty books and a musty old paper smell. I entered the bookstore, and the bell on the door announced my arrival. An elderly man with deep, tired eyes watched me from behind the counter. "May I help you?" he asked, his voice hoarse and full of experience. "I'm looking for information about a man known as the artist," I replied, trying to hide the urgency in my voice. The bookseller looked at me cautiously, as if pondering whether or not he should share his knowledge. The artist, a name that brings back bad memories. Few dare to talk about him. "Why are you interested?" I explained my situation, omitting some details that might seem insane. The man listened attentively and after a moment of silence nodded. "Very good. Follow me." He led me to a hidden section of the bookstore where he pulled a thick old book from a shelf. Opening it, he revealed a secret compartment that contained a yellowed manuscript. "This is a diary of a former resident of the city, someone who also had an encounter with the artist. You can find answers here, but be warned. The truths you discover may be more terrifying than you imagine." I thanked him and returned to my apartment, where I spent the night reading the diary. Each page was filled with accounts of encounters with the artist, descriptions of pacts and curses that destroyed lives. I discovered that the artist was a servant of an ancient demon, and his power came from an evil artifact, a ring that he used to channel the souls of the pactants. As I read, I felt a chill and heard a soft whisper that seemed to come from all directions. The oppression in the air was palpable, and shadows danced on the walls of my apartment. Every word in the diary seemed to awaken something dark in the environment around me. That night I was tormented by nightmares. I saw distorted faces and heard screams of agony. I dreamed that I was trapped in a maze of mirrors, each reflection showing a more grotesque and corrupted version of myself. I woke up in a cold sweat, with the feeling that I was not alone in the room. The terror grew with each passing day. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed without explanation, and the whispers turned into screams. I knew I needed to confront the artist again, but this time with more information and a plan. I decided to return to the gallery. The place was even darker, with an aura of evil that seemed to pulse in the walls. The artist was waiting for me, an enigmatic smile on his face. "I see you're back, Gabriel. Did you find what you were looking for?" "I know about the ring," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know it's the source of your power. I came to end this." The artist laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Do you think you can face me? Do you think you can destroy something so ancient and powerful?" I advanced, but an invisible force stopped me. I fought it with all my strength, but it seemed I was fighting against darkness itself. The artist raised his hand, revealing the ring, glowing with an eerie light. "This ring is the key to my immortality. All who make pacts with me feed its power. You cannot destroy it." Desperately, I remembered the diary. It had been written about the weakness of the ring, that it could only be destroyed by someone willing to sacrifice their own soul. I knew I was faced with an impossible choice. "I am willing to sacrifice my soul to destroy you and lift this curse," I declared, feeling the weight of the decision. The artist hesitated, and the strength holding me weakened. With one last effort, I reached out and grabbed the ring, feeling a searing pain shoot through my body. The artist screamed, and the gallery began to shake, as if it were collapsing. A brilliant light enveloped everything, and I felt my consciousness slipping away. I woke up again in my apartment, exhausted and disoriented. The portrait was gone, and the room was eerily quiet. I knew the battle was far from over. I needed to find a way to survive and discover if the artist had truly been defeated. The fear was still there, a constant presence in my life. But now there was a glimmer of hope. The journey toward redemption and the fight against the darkness that had settled over my existence continued. The future was uncertain, but I was determined to fight, to resist the terror that surrounded me and find a path to freedom. My story was not over yet, and the road ahead of me was long and full of dangers. But I was ready to face any challenge that came my way, with the hope of one day freeing my soul from the clutches of evil. The momentary sense of relief did not last. The walls of my apartment, once merely oppressive, now seemed to whisper secrets and horrors that only I could hear. Shadows moved with a life of their own, lurking in corners, and the air was charged with a malignant energy that made my skin crawl. I decided to leave the house. I needed air, a space where I could think clearly. However, as soon as I stepped onto the street, I realized that the world around me had changed as well. The city seemed to be plunged into an eternal gloom, where people walked like ghosts with empty gazes and mechanical movements. I walked to the city park, a place that used to bring me peace. But when I got there, I saw something that made me stop. In the center of the park, there was a statue that shouldn't have been there. It was a macabre representation of the artist, holding the ring I believed I had destroyed. The statue seemed to be watching me, and for a moment, I thought its eyes moved. Fear took hold of me, but I knew I couldn't run away. I needed to understand what was happening, why I could still feel the artist's presence. As I walked through the park, I began to hear familiar whispers, voices that echoed in my mind, telling me that the true horror was just beginning. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I turned quickly and saw a hooded figure standing a few feet away. The figure lifted its head, revealing the pale, disfigured face of one who seemed trapped between life and death. "You cannot escape, Gabriel," the figure said in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of an abyss. "The artist still lives, and his power grows with each passing day." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I am one of the souls he has imprisoned. We are all doomed unless you find a way to destroy him forever." Before I could answer, the figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing terror. I returned home, determined to find a solution. I needed to understand more about the ring and the artist, and the only way to do that was to delve deeper into his history. I spent the night awake, researching everything I could about demonic pacts and evil artifacts. With each page turned, the feeling of despair increased. I discovered that the artist's ring was an ancient artifact, created by a cult that worshipped demons. It could not be destroyed by conventional means. It needed to be taken to a specific place, an altar hidden deep in an ancient forest where dark rituals were performed. I decided that my next mission would be to find this altar and destroy the ring once and for all. The path would be dangerous, and time was against me. Each day, The artist's presence became stronger, and I could feel him getting closer. I prepared my things and left for the forest, guided only by the information I managed to find in ancient manuscripts. The journey was arduous, and the feeling of being watched never left me. The forest was a nightmarish place, where the trees seemed to move and the animals watched with eyes shining with malice. Finally, I reached the altar, a circle of black stones that emanated a sinister energy. I placed the ring in the center and began to recite the incantation I had found. The air around me became thick, and a shadow began to form, taking the shape of the artist. "Do you think you can destroy me, Gabriel?" His voice echoed, full of contempt. "You are just a man, weak and desperate." I continued the incantation, my voice shaking but determined. The shadow advanced, and I felt intense pain pass through my body. It was as if my very soul was being ripped out. "I will not stop," I shouted, gathering all my strength. "I will end this, whatever the cost." The artist's shadow screamed in fury, and the ring began to shine with an intense light. The pain was unbearable, but I continued, knowing this was my only chance at release. Suddenly, an explosion of light blinded me, and everything around me dissolved into a cacophony of sounds and screams. I felt my body being thrown backwards, and when the light dimmed, the ring was gone. The altar was destroyed, and the artist's presence had disappeared. I fell to my knees, exhausted and sore, but relieved. He knew he had succeeded, that he had destroyed the ring and with it the artist's power. However, as I stood up, I realized something still wasn't right. The silence around me was too deep, and the darkness seemed thicker. I looked at the trees and saw that they were slowly approaching as if they were living entities. I felt a new presence, something even older and more evil than the artist. The terror returned, stronger than ever, and I realized that my journey was far from over. As I ran through the forest, I heard whispers promising new horrors. I knew I had awakened something bigger, something that couldn't be faced alone. My story was just beginning, and the real nightmare was yet to come. In the vastness of the forgotten lands where dreams of greatness often turn into nightmares, there is a city that has flourished in an inexplicable way. Its founder, Raphael, an ambitious young man with grandiose dreams, found himself embroiled in a pact that would bring both prosperity and terror. This is the story of how greed and the desire for power can attract forces beyond human understanding, resulting in a cycle of horror that knows no end. I have always been a man of great ambitions. Since I was a child, I dreamed of building something great, something that would leave my mark on the world. My name is Raphael, and this is the story of how my ambition turned into my biggest nightmare. I grew up in a small town where my father owned a small hardware store and my mother was a teacher. I learned from an early age to value hard work, but the simple life was never enough for me. When I turned 20, I decided I wanted something more. I wanted to found a city that would be a model of prosperity and innovation. I didn't have the resources, but determination burned inside me like an unquenchable flame. It was then that I met a strange man, with piercing eyes and a smile that never reached his eyes. His name was Victor, and he seemed to know exactly what I wanted. "I can help you make your dreams come true, Raphael," said Victor, his voice sounding like poisoned honey. "But everything has a price." I should have suspected, I should have questioned, but my ambition blinded my judgment. I accepted his offer without thinking about the consequences. Victor guided me through a dark ritual, involving ancient symbols and words I didn't understand. In the end, he explained the price. Each year, an innocent soul must be surrendered to maintain the city's prosperity. At first, it seemed like a small price to pay. My city, which I named Nova Esperanza, grew quickly. Businesses were flourishing, people were happy and healthy, and I was revered as a visionary. But as freshman year approached, I began to feel a dark presence, something that hid in the shadows and watched my every move. On the night of the city's first anniversary, I heard faint crying coming from the old mansion that I had renovated to serve as my residence. I followed the sound to the basement where I found a young woman, apparently lost and scared. She looked at me with eyes full of terror and whispered, "He's here." Before he could react, Victor appeared from the shadows, his eyes glowing with hellish malice. "You know what needs to be done, Raphael," he said, his voice cold as ice. Dread gripped me, but I knew I had no choice. I handed the young woman over to Victor, feeling guilt and horror gnaw at my soul. She disappeared into the shadows, her cry echoing in my mind. The city continued to prosper, but at a terrible cost. Each year a new soul was taken, and Victor's dark presence became more oppressive. I tried to drown my guilt at work, but the whispers of victims haunted me. My dreams were populated by their terrified faces, their voices crying out for justice. When I met Clara, a young teacher who had moved to Nova Esperanza, I felt a ray of hope. We quickly fell in love and soon got married. Clara brought light to my dark life, and for a while I managed to forget the pact. We had a daughter, Laura, who became the center of our world. But the joy was short-lived. When Laura turned 6, she began to mysteriously fall ill. The doctors could find no explanation, and Clara and I watched helplessly as our daughter wasted away. Desperate, I went to look for Victor, begging for help. "You know what needs to be done, Raphael," he repeated, his cruel smile tearing at my heart. The idea of sacrificing yet another soul was unbearable, but Laura's health was getting worse every day. I decided to make one last sacrifice, hoping it would save my daughter. I met an old friend, Carlos, who had moved to Nova Esperanza in search of a better life. I invited him to my house, and with a heavy heart, I prepared the trap. That night, the whispers became screams. Carlos' sacrifice did not have the desired effect. Laura passed away before the ritual was complete, and my life fell apart. Clara left me. Unable to forgive or understand the city, despite remaining prosperous, became a place of horror for me. I lived the next few years like a ghost, managing a delicatessen on the outskirts of town, trying to hide from the consequences of my choices. But the lost souls continued to haunt me. Objects moved on their own. Unexplained noises and shadows dancing on the walls were a constant reminder of my guilt. One night, as I was closing up shop, I heard a faint cry coming from the basement. My mind told me to run, but my legs carried me to the source of the sound. I found Laura, or at least a shadow of her former self. Her eyes, filled with pain, pierced my soul. "Father, why did you do this?" she asked, her voice thick with sadness. The horror of my situation intensified. I tried to hug her, but she disappeared like smoke. The whispers of the other souls joined hers, creating a cacophony of accusations. I ran outside, trying to escape the ghosts I had created. It was then that I realized I could not run forever. I had to face Victor and end the cycle of horror. I returned to the mansion where it all began, determined to find a way to undo the pact. Victor was there, waiting for me. His smirk made me tremble, but I summoned all the courage I had. "I wish to undo the pact," I declared, my voice firm despite my fear. "You know the price, Raphael," he said, his eyes glowing with hellish fire. I realized that the only way to end this was to sacrifice my own soul. I accepted my fate, hoping that it would free the souls I had condemned. Victor performed the ritual, and the pain was indescribable. I felt my life being ripped from me, every memory, every emotion, everything disappearing into a dark void. But contrary to what I had expected, I found no peace in death. I woke up in a place that looked like a twisted version of New Hope. The streets were deserted, the houses in ruins, and a dark fog covered everything. The souls of the victims wandered aimlessly, their faces etched with eternal suffering. I realized then that I had condemned not only myself, but all of them to an eternal purgatory. Victor, now a hulking, grotesque figure, loomed before me. "Did you think you could escape so easily?" He laughed, the sound shaking the ground. Now I was the guardian of the city of lost souls, doomed to guide new souls into this hell. Each new victim who crossed the border into New Hope became part of the cycle, and I could do nothing to stop it. The city continued to thrive in the real world, but here, it was a place of endless despair. Each night, I heard the screams of lost souls, saw their shadows on the walls, and felt the weight of my guilt. I was trapped in this cycle of horror, unable to find redemption. My ambition and greed led me to this fate, and now all I could do was wait for the next soul to be damned. Time meant nothing here. The days and nights blended together into an eternity of torment. But I knew that one day, someone would find a way to break the cycle. Perhaps someone braver, wiser, will be able to free all the souls trapped here, including my own. Until then, I will continue my dark existence, guiding new souls to this purgatory, hoping that one day, somehow, we will find peace. And so, the city of lost souls remains, a silent testament to human greed and despair. Nights in the city of lost souls were an endless torment. The sound of the damned souls' wails filled the air, creating a symphony of despair that echoed through every ruin, every deserted street. I wandered this twisted version of New Hope, a shadow of myself, trying to find a way to end the cycle of horror. One night, as I walked through the fog-shrouded streets, I saw a figure in the distance. He seemed to be a young man, newly arrived, his gaze lost like that of so many others before him. As I approached, I realized that he was holding something in his hands, an ancient spell book, similar to the one Victor had used in the ritual. Something inside me stirred, a spark of hope amidst the despair. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice echoing through the fog. He looked at me, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. I don't know where I am. Who are you?" "My name is Raphael. I am the guardian of this place. You were drawn here by something, or someone." The young man nodded, still clutching the book tightly. "My name is Lucas. I found this book in the library in my town. There was a ritual that promised power and knowledge. I thought it was just a legend." "It's not a legend, Lucas. This place is real, and now you are trapped here just like the rest of us." Lucas stared at the book, a look of determination forming on his face. "I don't believe there isn't a way out. There must be something in this book that can help us." I spent the next few nights by Lucas's side, studying the book in an attempt to find a solution. The pages were full of ancient symbols and rituals, many of which I didn't understand. But there was something different about Luke. His hope was contagious, and I slowly began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be the key to our liberation. As we explored the book's secrets, Victor's presence became increasingly oppressive. He loomed out of the shadows, his eyes shining with mischief. "Do you really think you can escape, Raphael? This place is eternal, and your soul belongs to me." But Lucas wasn't intimidated. "There is a way out, Raphael. I feel it. We need to perform a reversal ritual, something powerful enough to break the pact." On the night of the ritual, the tension in the air was palpable. The damned souls seemed to know something was about to happen. Their whispers and wails intensified, creating an atmosphere of fear and hope. Lucas and I prepared everything meticulously, drawing the symbols on the floor and reciting the words from the book. At the climactic moment, I felt a powerful force surround us, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. Victor appeared, his grotesque and imposing form, trying to stop us. "You will never escape, Raphael. This is your destiny." But Lucas, with a courage I had never seen, faced Victor head-on. "You can't keep us here forever. The power of the pact can be reversed." The battle between Lucas and Victor was intense, a struggle of supernatural forces that shook the very ground beneath our feet. At the last moment, Lucas managed to recite the final words of the ritual, and an explosion of light enveloped everything. When the light dissipated, we found ourselves back in the real version of New Hope. The ruins, the fog, everything was gone. Lucas was next to me, exhausted but victorious. The lost souls were free, and Victor had been banished, at least for now. But the peace did not last long. On the horizon, a storm was forming, and with it, a new threat. Victor wouldn't give up so easily, and so, even though we had escaped the city of lost souls, we knew the fight was far from over. Lucas and I prepared for the next battle, knowing that the fate of the city and our souls depended on it. Darkness was lurking, and the true test of our courage and determination was yet to come. The pact had been broken, but the forces hunting us were relentless, and the terror we faced was just the beginning of something much greater. And so, we continued, ever vigilant, ready to face the darkness again, hoping that one day we could finally find the peace we so desired. The days following the reversal ritual brought a false sense of security. New Hope seemed to be returning to normal, but the storm on the horizon was a harbinger that the real terror was yet to come. The city, freed from the weight of lost souls, breathed a little easier, but I knew this was only temporary. Victor had been banished, but not destroyed, and the darkness he represented still haunted us. Lucas and I began to constantly monitor for signs of any supernatural disturbance. The nights were long and full of apprehension. One day, as dusk began to give way to night, a feeling of intense cold invaded my house. A cold that did not come from the environment, but seemed to emanate from the depths of my own being. I went to the window and looked out. The streets were deserted, but something seemed wrong. The fog that once enveloped the city of lost souls was beginning to form again, creeping through the streets like invisible fingers trying to grab everything in its path. I ran to tell Lucas, but he was already at my door, pale and scared. "Raphael, he's coming back. I feel Victor's presence growing stronger. We need to act quickly." We went back to the library where it all started, trying to find something, anything, that could help us. The pages of the old spellbook were more worn and dusty, as if reflecting our growing hopelessness. Then we found a passage that talked about a final ritual, a definitive confrontation with the forces of darkness. "We have to do this, Raphael. We have no other choice," said Lucas, with a determination that masked his fear. In preparation for the ritual, time seemed to slip through our fingers. The fog thickened, and shadowy figures began to appear around corners, their eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. The city was being taken again, and this time Victor's presence was even more overwhelming. On the night of the final confrontation, the sky was covered with black clouds, and the moon seemed an apathetic spectator. In the center of the city, we drew the ancient symbols and prepared the necessary ingredients for the ritual. Lucas and I positioned ourselves, ready to face our fate. As we began to chant the words, an icy wind rose, almost knocking us over. Victor appeared in the middle of the circle, his form more grotesque and terrifying than ever. His eyes glowed with deep hatred and his voice reverberated like thunder. "You will not escape. This city is mine, and all who live in it are doomed." The ensuing battle was a chaos of screams, piercing winds and shadows that danced like demons around us. Victor launched his attacks with a ferocity I had never seen. Every word we uttered in the ritual seemed to irritate him more, and his form constantly changed, an amalgamation of nightmares. I felt a sharp pain in my chest as a shadow crossed my body. Lucas shouted my name, but his voice was drowned out by Victor's roar. We were being beaten. The darkness seemed invincible, hope a distant concept. But then, something unexpected happened. The souls of Victor's victims, those who had been sacrificed, began to emerge around us. Their faces, once marked by suffering, now showed fierce determination. They advanced on Victor, their presence shining with an intense light that contrasted with the darkness around them. "It's now, Lucas," I shouted, feeling renewed strength within me. We chanted the final words of the ritual with all our might, and the light of the souls increased until everything around us became a blinding glare. Victor roared in pain, his form disintegrating under the combined power of the souls and the ritual. In a last desperate effort, he released a scream that echoed through the city, but was finally silenced. When the light dissipated, the fog had disappeared and Victor was no longer there. The city was silent, but it was a silence of peace, not despair. The souls of the victims, now free, looked at us one last time before disappearing, finally at peace. Lucas and I fell to our knees, exhausted, but alive. New Hope was safe, at least for now, but we knew that the forces of darkness were persistent, and that the real challenge would be to maintain the peace we had achieved. The future was uncertain, and darkness always lurked, waiting for an opportunity to return. But as long as I had the strength, I would fight to protect the city and redeem the souls that had been lost. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I felt there was hope. And so, the city of lost souls continued, a place where past and present intertwined, and where terror was always lurking, ready to strike. But with each new day, we fought to keep the light alive, knowing that the true test of our courage and determination was yet to come.